Hello and welcome to this overview of screening and prevention. In this video, we will set the stage for the whole idea of screening. So I want to make sure that you have an idea of where this fits into the whole grand scheme of things. In public health, we have different levels of prevention, and those levels are primary, secondary, and tertiary. Sometimes people draw those as primary, secondary, and tertiary as shorthand, but you could even see that nomenclature on a question, so I wanted you to be familiar with that. Primary prevention are the kinds of things where there is no disease. And those are things like immunizations, it could be health education, it could even be things like policies on complete streets. This is where you have people who do not have any kind of disease process going on, and what you're doing is you're preventing them from moving into that state where they have a disease. Secondary and tertiary prevention then both are in the situation where people have disease. I'll put DZ here. However, in secondary prevention, they do not have symptoms, so no symptoms. In tertiary disease, these people do have symptoms. SX. So these people are symptomatic, and so you're preventing them from continuing to move in this direction, which death is over here somewhere. So in secondary prevention, if they don't have symptoms, then how would you be able to do something for them? And so the primary thing that we do for secondary prevention is a thing called screening. And so that's how screening fits into the whole grand scheme of things. Tertiary is treatment. So for screening, basically what we're doing is either taking a group of individuals who are interested in knowing if they have subclinical or early stages of disease, and you apply this screening process, either a test or an exam, some kind of thing, or you maybe have a high-risk group of people that takes this screening test. Now, the interesting thing about a screening test is that after you have the screening test, and we'll talk more about this later, but the screening test isn't the only thing you do. A lot of times after you do the screening test, then you do what's called confirmatory testing. So you confirm that that particular person has that disease that we're screening for in the secondary prevention, because the screening test is, as you'll see coming up, it's not always the same thing as a diagnostic test. And so just because a person screens positive doesn't automatically mean that they have the disease. So screening is this process that's kind of in the middle, and that confirmatory test could say yes, that person does have the disease, or no, the person doesn't have the disease. In either case, there may still be things that we want to do for that person. We may still want to then help them to stay healthy, or if we find that they do have disease, help them continue to move in this direction so that they are moving in the direction of health. Your textbook has a definition of screening as defined as the presumptive identification of unrecognized disease. I'm going to have to scroll up here a little bit. By the application of tests, exams, and procedures for which you can get the results rapidly. And so these different parts of the definition of screening are each quite important. So presumptive means that when that person is screened as a positive, we still have to do this confirmatory testing. So we presume that this positive test means something. Identification means that we're finding something that we didn't know about before, that and unrecognized. And so these people don't have symptoms at all. If they had symptoms, then we would already be treating them. We would be diagnosing and treating them. if they were symptomatic. So this is unrecognized, and the disease needs to be specified what we're after. And here's the specific part of the screening, is that we have some kind of a test, some kind of an exam, some kind of a procedure where we can find that disease process in its early stages. And the whole idea of it being able to be applied rapidly is pretty important. There are a couple of other features about screening tests that can be also important. Your book lists them as being rapid as well as simple. In other words, it needs to be a test that's not too complicated. Often the screening type test is much less complicated than this confirmatory test. And so the screening test has all these qualities, but then later on we go to the confirmatory test, and it's sometimes the opposite of these. So it needs to be rapid, it needs to be simple, it needs to be pretty inexpensive, because we're trying to apply this to a sort of broad reach. We're throwing our net wide. It needs to be safe. If we're applying this screening test to people who don't have symptoms, and we don't want to be causing harm to somebody who doesn't have the disease, and it needs to be acceptable. So if the people who are to be screened think, oh, yeah, I don't want to do that test because it seems uncomfortable or odd, if it's too expensive, they won't participate. If it has its own negative side effects and just doing the screening causes people to have disease, then that's not a good idea. If it's too complicated or it takes a really long time, then those are all things that can sometimes defeat the purpose of having a screening test. So that's kind of an overview explanation of how screening fits into the big picture of things. We'll be talking about this screening test right here, and then we'll also be alluding to the whole idea of confirmatory testing, but really our focus is on that screening test. So thank you for joining me for this introduction.